The courage to rise. Maya Angelou's Still I Rise through the lens of marriage and family therapy. Welcome back to Ask Mindful M, where poetry and marriage and family therapy come together to create a space for reflection, healing, and becoming. I am grateful you're here. I'm Mary O, Associate Licensed Marriage and Family Therapist. And today's conversation begins with a question. What happens after we've acknowledged our pain? What happens after we've laid down the mask? How do we begin again when life has knocked us down? And so that is allusion to, we've been walking through this summer series in a few different steps. And so if you want to take a moment and tap back in episodes 1 through 3 of the summer series, or you can start here and work back just to kind of continue along this path this summer. Poetry has a remarkable way of saying in a few lines what many of us have carried in our hearts for years. Today's poem is one of those rare gifts. Maya Angelou gently reminds us that resilience isn't pretending life didn't hurt, it's choosing to rise anyway. So why this poem? After episode 3, I found myself thinking about what comes next. Removing the mask is courageous, but it's only the beginning. Eventually, life asks another question. Now that you've shown up as your authentic self, how will you move forward? That's why Still I Rise feels like the next chapter in our journey together. It's not simply a poem about confidence, it's a poem about dignity, about perseverance, about refusing to let disappointment become the final sentence of your story. For me, this poem reminds us that healing isn't measured by how often we fall, because that can happen a lot. It's revealed by our willingness to stand again. So a little background on Maya Angelou. She was far more than a celebrated poet. She is far more than a celebrated poet. She was a memoirist, educator, actress, civil rights activist, and one of the most influential literary voices of the 20th century. Her life reflected extraordinary resilience. She experienced trauma, discrimination, personal loss, and profound hardship, yet chose to transform those experiences into words that continue to inspire millions around the world. Published in 1978, Still I Rise quickly became an anthem of hope and perseverance. While many recognize its powerful historical significance, its message reaches beyond any one moment in history. It speaks to anyone who has ever been underestimated, dismissed, wounded, or told they could not overcome. Perhaps that's why it continues to resonate decades later. It reminds us that resilience isn't reserved for extraordinary people. It's quietly growing in ordinary people every single day. And today, perhaps that person is you. So here's the poem, Still I Rise by Maya Angelou. You may write me down in history with your bittersweet, twisted lies. Let me run that back. You may write me down in history with your bitter, twisted lies. You may trod me in the very dirt, but still, like dust, I'll rise. Does my sassiness upset you? Why are you beset with gloom? 'Cause I walk like I've got oil wells pumping in my living room. Just like moons and like suns, with the certainty of tides, just like hopes springing high, still I'll rise. Did you want to see me broken? Bowed head and lowered eyes? Shoulders falling down like teardrops, weakened by my soulful cries? Does my haughtiness offend you? Don't you take it awful hard? 'Cause I laugh like I've got gold mines digging in my own backyard. You may shoot me with your words. You may cut me with your eyes. You may kill me with your hatefulness, but still, like air, I'll rise. Does my sexiness upset you? Does it come as a surprise that I dance like I've got diamonds at the meeting of my thighs? Out of the huts of history's shame, I rise. Up from a past that's rooted in pain, I rise. I'm a black ocean, leaping and wide, welling and swelling, I bear the tide. Leaving behind nights of terror and fear, I rise. Into a daybreak that's wondrously clear, I rise. Bringing the gifts that my ancestors gave, I am the dream and the hope of the slave. I rise, I rise, I rise. And so, a few reflections in considering this piece. To start, one thing I have come to appreciate about resilience is that it rarely announces itself. Sometimes resilience looks like getting out of bed, making the appointment, sending the text, trying again after disappointment. Healing isn't always dramatic. Sometimes it's beautifully ordinary. Marriage and family therapy reminds us that meaningful change often happens through small, consistent steps rather than sudden overnight transformation. Those quiet moments matter. I implore you, don't overlook them. Next, another beautiful truth that I appreciate about resilience, it is often relational. Very few of us rise entirely on our own. Someone believed in us before we believed in ourselves. Perhaps it was a parent, a grandparent, a teacher, a friend, a spouse, a mentor, a therapist. Hope has a remarkable way of growing in the presence of safe relationships. Sometimes another person's belief becomes the bridge that carries us until we can believe again in ourselves. If you have experienced that, what a gift. Cherish that. Share that. Continue that. Maybe you become the person that is that person for somebody else. Next, I want to just consider one of the gifts of this poem is that it refuses to ignore pain. It acknowledges hardships without surrendering to them. What if resilience isn't the absence of suffering, but the decision not to let suffering become your identity? Our stories matter, our wounds matter, but neither has to determine how the story ends. Healing doesn't erase what happened. It just changes how we carry it. Let me run that back. Healing doesn't erase what happened. is simply the opportunity to change how we carry it, how we carry with us that experience. We carry it differently. It's going to feel differently, healed versus unhealed. And last, every new beginning asks something of us. Not certainty, not perfection, only courage to show up. Sometimes the bravest thing we do is simply decide, choose to rise one more time. You don't have to know every step ahead. You only need enough courage for the next faithful one. And so in all of these reflections here is a little clinical nugget I'd like to share here. Marriage and family therapy teaches us that resilience is rarely an individual achievement. More often, it is nurtured through relationships that reminds us of our strengths when life has caused us to question them. Healing grows where compassion, connection, and hope are present. So as you move through this week, notice the people who help you rise. And also on the flip side, notice where you could be a support for somebody to rise. And consider how you might become the source of encouragement for someone else or something, some project, something you're engaged in more systemically. It starts with the moments. Notice the moments, notice the people, and continue to show up for that process. And so before we close today, I'd like to invite you into one final reflection. It's a moment of gratitude. That's what we'll call this. Think of someone who helped you rise. Maybe they believed in you when you struggled to believe in yourself. Maybe they stayed during a difficult season. Maybe they simply reminded you that your story wasn't over. If that person is still in your life, perhaps this week is a good week to tell them, thank you. Even if they're not still in your life, maybe they have passed, maybe there has been a disconnection there. Still, meditate on that energy of that thankfulness. And if not anybody is coming to mind, take up this moment to appreciate you. Appreciate how much you have shown up for yourself, how much you show up for others in your life, and understanding that resilience has many faces, many seasons. Sometimes one of them is gratitude. And so if you've been following along, we have been diving into these reflection cards. And so this week's reflection was twofold. What part of you is quietly learning to rise again? And keep in mind, resilience isn't pretending life didn't hurt. It's believing your future is still worth showing up for despite it. There isn't a right answer. This is only an invitation to consider and reflect upon this. As we close today, I'd like to leave you with one final question. What part of your life is asking for another chance? And what would it look like to meet it with hope instead of fear? Fear is easy. Fear is easy to call up, easy to use as a shield. It's easy. Hope is hard. However, there's a lot of ease on the other side of hope after you move past the fear. What would it look like to move past the fear and embrace hope? To look at that part of your life that's asking for another chance and meet it with hope. Thank you for spending time with me today. Thank you for being part of the reflection community. Wherever today's reflection meets you, I'm glad you're here. So please, keep reflecting, keep healing, keep becoming, stay mindful.